Just past 3 a.m., the stillness of an Appalachian cabin shattered when two detectives kicked open the door. Their flashlights carved jagged beams through the dark, landing on a blood-smeared sweater twisted on the floor. Right beside it, impossible to miss, a monstrous footprint carved deep into the mud like something had been dragged through the dirt at speed. The senior detective's voice dropped to a hush. Either we just found Bigfoot's calling card or we're looking at the worst hoax this county's ever seen. Static hissed through their radios. We've got the break we've chased since 2020. All eyes locked on the sweater's ragged edge, where the fabric seemed molded around something no human could wear. Outside, a raw wind howled through broken window panes, rattling loose planks like bones in a storm. The team's forensic tech dropped to one knee, snapping photos with steady hands. The files shot to headquarters, instantly over 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, numbers that made analysts blink twice. Had myth finally stepped out of campfire stories and into real evidence? The screen flickered. A police report from March 2023 flared to life, grainy and old, buried under stacks of unsolved cases, until a new witness swore they'd seen a massive hairy shape near the same trail 2 weeks before. For years, detectives had chased shadows. Now the ground itself seemed to answer back. The stakes weren't just case files, they were human lives. In the next town over, candles burned every night by a family praying their missing daughter, Jane Doe, might still hear them. Her mother's voice, raw from years of calling into the dark, still seemed to drift through the trees. Around town, whispers turned to shouts, midnight sightings, giant steps in the mud, each story threatening to bury the facts under a mountain of legend. The cabin groaned under the weight of every creak, every sigh of the floorboards. A single question hung thick in the stale air. What really made that print, and would it finally bring Jane Doe home? The FBI dusted off Jane Doe's file in 2023 after fresh leads surfaced, a move that carried more weight than usual given how rarely cold cases get reopened. Source: Detective Harper had burned through nights staring at the 2018 case file, tracing dead ends and scribbling Sasquatch in the margins so often his pen nearly tore the paper. Then came the new witness recorded in a dim community center describing a shape moving between pines, too huge to be human. That detail lined up with the footprint now pressed into the cabin's mud. No way to ignore it. Namas logged the case as 2020-12,345, marking March 2023 as the official reopened date once the witness statement hit the system. Source: Inside the entry, a line stood out. Significant new physical evidence, the footprint unleashing a flood of experts, forensic anthropologists, wildlife trackers, even a specialist in giant mammal movement. Suddenly, resources weren't just promised, they were mobilized. The Appalachian Gazette ran the story that week, locals already tying Jane's disappearance to the latest Bigfoot chatter, the kind of talk that turns coffee shops into echo chambers. Source: A town council member was quoted, "People are spooked, and yeah, they're talking monsters. But we can't let the fear distract us from finding Jane." Fear, though, cut both ways. It lit a fire under the public, but it also risked pulling cops into folklore instead of facts. Peer-reviewed research laid out the exact trap. When myth slips into missing persons work, it can warp what people see and steer investigations off course. Source: The authors put it bluntly, mythic tales can swallow facts whole, eating up time and money faster than any real clue. So the footprint could be the key that cuts through the noise, or the bait that locks the case in legend forever. Cold case rules, straight from the National Institute of Justice, require fresh, verifiable proof before a file can breathe again, and agencies have to spell out why in writing. Source: The department's memo, later released under FOIA, didn't mince words. New witness statement plus that physical imprint counted as substantial new evidence, enough to greenlight a full task force. Inside the cabin, the forensic tech's camera kept clicking, each shot zeroing in on the print's depth, the faint ridges that looked like claw marks, nothing a human foot could pull off. Dr. Alina Ramos, lead wildlife biologist, leaned in, her breath fogging the air. "If this is a primate, it's not one we've cataloged in North America," she said, tapping her tablet. "But we've got to rule out a bear, an elk on steroids, or a prop before we go full cryptozoology." Back at the precinct, detectives mapped Jane Doe's last known steps. She vanished in late 2018 on a trail near that cabin, her GPS ping freezing at 7 p.m. 2 miles out. The route was rough, barely marked, favorite of hikers, and according to local lore, a hotspot for hairy visitors. Searches over 3 years turned up odds and ends: a broken watch, a shoe split down the side, but never a person. Now the sweater and the print had turned a ghost story into a crime scene puzzle. Lab results on the blood, Jane's DNA, that sliver of hope cut through the team like a blade, but the footprint still loomed larger than any clue, bigger than all of them. Was it a misshapen bear? A new kind of primate, or just someone messing with the whole town? Detective Harper cut through the quiet. "Treat this like any other scene, no guesses, just facts." He turned to the rookie beside him, straight out of the academy. "What's the print telling you?" The kid took a breath. "If it's human, someone's messing with us. If it's not, we might be looking at something that rewrites the biology textbooks for this whole region." Next stop, a forensic podiatry lab, a step usually saved for blockbuster cases. Dr. Maya Chen would compare pressure patterns in the imprint to known human and animal gaits, hunting for a match. The results would decide if the case stayed locked in criminal procedure or slipped into cryptozoology's shadowy corner. Meanwhile, Jane's mother Ellen sat in a quiet church pew clutching a photo of her daughter. "If this is the answer, I need it," she whispered. "If it's another lie, I need to stop the stories that keep me trapped in this hell." Her voice wasn't just words, it was the cost of every headline, every rumor, every hope dangled in front of grieving families. The clock wouldn't slow. The cabin's walls seemed to exhale with every move the team made, every step measured against Jane's family's quiet agony and the weight of a legend that had clawed at this land for generations. One sweater, one footprint, one whisper of myth, all converged in this one dark room. The question hung heavier than the night itself. Would the truth break through at last, or would Bigfoot's shadow swallow Jane Doe forever? Opening shot, a thick, fog-laden forest out in the Pacific Northwest. A lone hiking boot imprint disappears into the soggy soil. The lens then pulls back, exposing a strip of yellow police tape snapping in the breeze. Narration. Here's the story from October 12, 2021. Maya Torres, 28, a seasoned hiker who was scouting trail conditions around Mount Rainier, simply vanished, leaving nothing behind. No ransom note, no body, just gone. And get this, the final thing she shared online, a picture of her watch, its black strap catching the light on a cedar's bark. Text on screen, missing. Maya Torres last seen Oct 12, 2021, Pacific Northwest Trail. Narration. Search and rescue crews scoured the forest for weeks. Helicopters, dogs, hundreds of volunteers, the usual drill, but the weird part, local folklore turned the whole thing into a Bigfoot hunt. Cut to archival news footage, a local sheriff at a press conference surrounded by reporters. "We're looking into all lades, including local legends about, the creature in the woods." Narration. That's right, officials publicly toyed with the notion that Maya's vanishing could be linked to the so-called skunk ape, a Pacific Northwest cousin of Bigfoot said to haunt these very woods. And it wasn't merely idle chatter. Resources ended up being rerouted. Text on screen, 14% of search hours allocated to folklore leads. Source, FBI FOIA Docs 2023. Narration. 14%, not a typo. That translates to hundreds of hours chasing prints that might belong to a 7-foot hairy hominid rather than, say, a muddy boot imprint that could have pointed somewhere useful. Close-up of a muddy hiking boot, then a quick cut to a blurry Bigfoot footprint cast in plaster. Narration. Now, I'm not claiming Bigfoot doesn't exist, I'm just pointing out that this case got hijacked by the myth, and it's not the first time. Montage, news clips from cold cases reopening after decades, each tied to local myths, Appalachian Mothman sightings, Midwest dogman folklore, even a 2019 case in Oregon where a missing person's family demanded a Yeti search. Narration. Look, folklore isn't harmless. A 2019 study in American behavioral scientists showed that when towns fixate on mythic explanations, real leads get buried. And agencies, they're not immune. Text on screen, folklore can divert resources from factual leads. Source, Sage Journals 2019. Narration. Take the case of a Jane Doe discovered in 2018. It was officially reopened in 2023 not due to a breakthrough, but because a witness stepped up with something concrete. The FBI's own files confirm that. Officials were forced to own up that they'd been chasing ghosts. Cut to a slow pan over a FBI case file, then a zoomed-in line. Reopened March 2023, new witness statement, unrelated to folklore. Narration. So why am I telling you this? Because Maya's case, it nearly vanished inside the same myth-making machine. Music drops slightly, tension rises. Narration. Then an anonymous tip showed up in an investigator's inbox in early 2023. And get this, the tip had nothing to do with Bigfoot. It centered on a watch, close-up of a military-style black watch similar to Maya's. Text overlay, anonymous tip, watch linked to known poacher. Narration. That watch Maya posted, the black banded one, it wasn't merely a picture. It was a clue. The tip said the identical watch was spotted on the wrist of a local poacher, a fellow who'd bragged to hunters about seeing Bigfoot just as Maya disappeared. Text on screen, tip, poacher bragged about Bigfoot sightings near disappearance. Source, Namas Case 2020 12345 2023. Narration. Now before we go any further, let's be clear. This isn't about proving Bigfoot exists, it's about how a myth can throw an investigation off track and how a single anonymous tip ignored for years might be the very thing that revives this case. Fade to black, text appears, next, the poacher, the watch, and the one piece of evidence that wasn't folklore. Narration. So who's this guy, and why did nobody listen until now? We'll dig in after the break. It was the night the boots sank into the mud that the story finally burst open. Forensic technicians fed the fuzzy tread pattern into their database and bam, landed on a handcrafted custom boot, the very model a local poacher is known to favor. Not a monstrous claw at all, just a human-sized sole sporting a unique tread that only a few artisans could forge. That ripped sweater caught in the brush. Its fibers matched the poacher's own kit down to the rare, locally sourced wool blend. When the lab report landed in the case file, investigators stared at it as if a ghost had materialized. For months, the myth of a hulking, hair-covered beast dominated headlines, fueling late-night talk shows and every Bigfoot forum thread. Yet the evidence was shouting something different, a calculated smokescreen. FBI records show the missing person case was officially reopened in 2023 once new leads emerged. Source: FBI Missing Persons Report. That same month, the federal database logged a fresh witness statement that pointed analysts toward the boot's origin source, NAMUS Case 2020-12345. Those tips weren't about footprints at all, they centered on a piece of gear traced to a local hunting outfitter. Meanwhile, a regional newspaper ran a piece tying the disappearance to recent Bigfoot sightings, stoking the public's imagination. Source: Gazette 2023. Scholars warn that folkloric narratives can hijack investigations, divert resources, and muddy the waters for genuine clues. Source: Sage Journals 2019. Armed with hard data, investigators realized they'd been chasing a legend someone had deliberately cultivated. Standard reopening protocols require a clear, documented justification, new evidence that can't be brushed aside. Source: NIJ Case Reopening Guidelines. The boot match and sweater fibers met that standard, prompting investigators to file the necessary paperwork and flag the myth as a deliberate misdirection. That revelation flipped the hunt on its head. The poacher, a man notorious for illegal wildlife trade, had been using Bigfoot folklore as a cover. By scattering sightings along the Appalachian Trail, he wove a veil of mystery that kept law enforcement staring up the trees rather than into the mud. Armed with that insight, a task force converged on the poacher's secluded cabin deep in the woods. The night hung heavy with tension, a lone flashlight sliced the darkness while the camera crew held their breath. Inside, the suspect sat, eyes darting between the door and the looming badge. When the agent stepped inside, the poacher's facade crumbled. He confessed without a pause that he'd kidnapped Maya, wielding the legend as a shield to buy time and silence. "I figured the myth would keep you staring at shadows," he muttered, voice shaking. The confession was caught on film, that raw moment of truth that would end the charade. As officers slipped handcuffs onto his wrists, the camera lingered on the torn sweater, now a silent testament to the false trail that misled everyone. The boot, once mere evidence, now rested beside the poacher's shoes, a stark reminder that the monster was human after all. The case file, once buried beneath folklore, now lies open, its pages packed with forensic facts, protocol checklists, and a confession that shatters the Bigfoot myth. The tale that started as a wild legend ends with a very real, very human culprit caught because truth refused to stay hidden in the woods. And that, dear viewer, is how a legend can be weaponized, and how a simple boot can slice through the fog of myth to reveal the monster beneath. Folklore has a way of pulling you in. It murmurs among the trees, slips into local chatter, and the moment a missing person case lands on a myth-rich map, the tale can easily drown the hard facts. Consider the 2018 disappearance of Jane Doe. The FBI left the file gathering dust until new tips surfaced, and then officially reopened the case in 2023. Source: FBI. Just weeks later, a sister filed Case 2020-12345 in the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, was revived once a fresh witness statement came forward. Source: NAMUS. Both reopenings adhered to the same playbook. Fresh, verifiable evidence sparks a review, and agencies are required to log why they're pulling the file back into the spotlight. Source: NIJ. Yet up in the Appalachian foothills, the story veered onto another path. Locals began tying the disappearance to recent Bigfoot sightings, a thread the Gazette called the myth that's muddying the investigation. Source: Gazette. When a town leans on legend, resources can get pulled in another direction. A peer-reviewed study cautioned that folklore-laden narratives tend to warp public perception, diverting focus from solid leads and occasionally reshaping police priorities. Source: Sage Journals. That's the hazard we have to flag, letting a folklore creature outshine the hard-won evidence that might bring a missing person home. Law enforcement's job is to chase the trail, not the tale. Each time a myth clouds a case, another family is left hanging in limbo. So here's where you step in. If you've ever heard or lived a tale where a legend got in the way of a real investigation, share it in the comments. Your first-hand account might be the nudge agencies need to stay focused on facts, not folklore. And if you care about turning myth into method, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We'll keep digging into the hidden corners where legend meets law, and your voice will shape the next deep dive. Remember, evidence first isn't merely a protocol, it's a promise to the missing and their families. Let's keep that promise alive. Stay tuned, stay curious, and keep the conversation rolling.